Hi, welcome. My name is Matthew Markel. I am here today to talk about the fascinating subject of dragons. And not just dragons that we know from old stories and myths and fairy tales, but more so our own personal dragons, our inner dragons, as it were. And I want to talk a little bit about why I think dragons are important. We have a very rich history in our own literature, mythology, stories, fairy tales, etc., of dragon stories. And in most, if not all of those dragon stories, all of those dragons appear in the story as embodiments of evil, as embodiments of resistance or antagonism. In other words, the dragon shows up and is meant to harm or hurt or destroy or mess something up that's precious to us or that's sacred to us in some way. Now, dragon stories can be found all over the world, in almost every cultural tradition and mythology. One interesting difference between dragons that we're familiar with in our own Western myths is that of the ancient Eastern, primarily Asian myths about dragons, in which dragons in a lot of those stories aren't always the embodiment of the evil principles that our Western dragons are. In many cases, those dragons are designed to be helpful in some way to humankind. And even the more wily ones need to be tethered and tamed a little bit, but not destroyed, not slain or conquered, but to bring them around to becoming allies to human beings and to humankind. So that's a pretty stark difference there, right? And so when it comes to Western dragons, the point there is that we don't have a whole lot to go on in terms of what can instruct us about what it means for those of us who are born and bred and growing up in Western traditions, what that means for us to tame dragons. We can't just copy somebody else's way of doing it. We have to kind of come to terms with our own way of doing it. Because our own myths are the embodiment of our own stories, our strengths, and also our ongoing wounds. And I believe one of the ongoing wounds of the Western stories, of the Western mythic imagination, is its inability to resolve, in many cases, its own pain, its own woundedness, its own inner fragmentation. Inner fragmentation is a story that we carry with us to this day. So I got really, really curious about this idea of taming dragons, taming and befriending dragons. And what does that mean for Western people to learn how to do that? I became curious enough about it that I decided to write a book. That's the book. It's called The Fire That Never Dies, Dragons of the West. The book is designed not to answer all of our questions. I think the book is primarily designed to teach us to ask better questions, to teach us how to ask different questions that operate out of maybe some different assumptions about our own human nature than maybe we have been raised with and taught and modeled in a lot of our Western myths and stories. See, the inner dragon is a part of us. And the dragon comes from the more shadowy places of who we are. The dragon shows up to kind of push us and get us moving when we find ourselves a little stuck somewhere in our lives. A little resistant to wanting to let go of some old stories about us that aren't maybe so true anymore, that maybe aren't so kind to us anymore. Stories that might have made sense a long time ago, but don't make sense for us to carry around anymore. But we keep holding on to them because they're familiar to us. And we don't know who else we're supposed to be outside of those stories. And so we become reluctant. We resist change. We can become anxious about it. And if we sit in that place for too long, those shadowy parts of ourselves start sending dragons our way to wake us up and to get our attention. Because dragons are good at getting our attention. And this is the tricky part, because our dragons appear to us first as those antagonists, right? Those parts of ourselves that want to ruin or destroy us or take us down in some way. They kind of become representatives of those places inside of us that we don't like very well, that we're afraid of, that we're ashamed of, that we're disgusted by. And our dragons force us, in some ways, to start acknowledging those places and to start talking to them. Because without our ability to do that, we're going to stay stuck in places that, in the long run, we don't want to stay stuck in forever. So, rather than being the embodiment of evil, our dragons are the embodiments of our own wounds. The wounds that we have not yet been able to acknowledge or start to bring some healing and inner reconciliation to. So that, in a sense, is what I think it means to learn how to start taming and befriending dragons. You see, the thing is, we're always going to become much more attached to whatever we're resisting or going to war with. So those places inside of ourselves where we are at war with ourselves, that's where we're going to stay stuck. If we go to war with our dragons will continue to become bigger and scarier and appear more evil to us until we're finally willing to hear what they have to say. It is only through talking to them that we begin to loosen that up a little bit, that we give ourselves the opportunity to see what potential gifts our dragons are protecting for us that we need to be able to see, acknowledge, and take responsibility for to move along in our lives. That is the gift of the dragon. So, this is the first of what I hope to be a number of interesting videos that I would like to post and share. Thank you for joining me. Please continue to come along. I hope this encourages you to begin asking some better questions in your own life and opening up the door for you to begin figuring out what inside you has been untended to. What inside you is begging for your attention, for your love, and your care. It's going to be coming from a dragon. Dragons are important, and not for the reasons that we think they are or have been taught. For something very, very different. So, in any case, we will continue this conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. And I look forward to being able to share more of these with you as we go along. Thank you again for your time.